Mozart in the morning. What could be better than Mozart in the morning? Well, waking up with Cerberus. That's what. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. Please look to the center ring. You have Gregory Junkbond Carpenter and Suzanne Sherman ready to bring you Waking Up with Cerberus. Behind the control panel, we have Mr. Jumpin' Jeff Johnson, and he's ready to flip switches and make your head spin.
Well, I don't know about spinning.
All right, fair enough. Boy, folks, today we got a great show for you. We're going to have a lot of fun, and I'll let Suzanne give you the background information, and then we're just going to kick it off. We're not going to even tell you what it is yet. We're going to make you sit here and guess what we're going to do. And it is live radio, first of all, so don't send that guess to us. Suzanne?
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. I want to remind everybody listening, you can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. We have a SoundCloud page. We have a YouTube page. You can like, you can share, you can follow. Please tell your friends. We're getting a lot of positive responses. People are sharing and really liking the information. Radio Co. How's our shows going on a 24/7 loop? There was always some great content here, and we don't chase the daily news. What we really do is talk about philosophies and how we can maybe get out from under this oppressive government that we have right now, and where can we maybe go if we need to. We'll make you a little bit uncomfortable when we talk about the truth. As I'm going to bring up a story momentarily that a lot of gun rights activists will probably be cheering on. Just like national reciprocity, what might seem good is ultimately probably a bad idea, and we think will change your way. You can listen to on our Radio Co-Loop also Greg Junkbond's shows, The Spy Who Loves Liberty, Liberty Minutes. I have case in point. My good friend Dave Benner has joined me recently. We discussed Fletcher v. Peck. We've got some other stuff coming up. He's going to join me also on an episode of the Wasatch Report. We're going to discuss the John Marshall and Alexander Hamilton and their legacy. And ultimately, they are the ones that are responsible for what we are dealing with today and our federal society to a national government. I don't know what that noise is, but Greg, I'll let you take it from here for a moment.
My goodness, I think that noise is Booger booting in.
Yes, I'm trying to shut off all the ringer stuff to my phone. Okay, hey, I was not prepared to jump in on you guys without.
That's okay. That's okay, Booger. Oh man, we're just starting off. We're just getting kicked in here and giving the introduction. If you just put your stuff on mute for now, that'd be good, and we can continue on.
Yeah, this train just needs to keep rolling here, you know.
Right,
I mean, the train whistle in the background.
You guys are killing me here. See, this is why, folks, and this is why we have the lawyer do all of the official legal disclaimers and all of the information about what's going on here, because it's a lawyerly job. You understand? When you come onto our radio network, you better look lawyerly. You better have a suit that's made of some type of cloth. Do you hear me, Mrs. Gambini?
Speaking of which, we had a bunch of coyotes run through here at about 3:30 in the morning. I was gonna bring that up in part of our little, Wasatch back flair here over here, and that what a great segue from lawyers to coyotes. It just smooths so well. So
I have a question, because out here in the East, we have an issue where the coyotes and wolves have interbred, and we have this hybrid type of a larger, very aggressive coyote that is very, very problematic for, obviously, many of the small animals in our neighborhoods now. Have you seen them out there?
I've heard of that, and the tough thing is where you guys live, it's not like you can shoot them, and
I can. I got 4 acres, and
okay,
no problem.
A lot of people, I've seen video of a man trying to walk his dog at night, and these were just regular coyotes, but they were just surrounding him as a pack, and he was able to make it back to his home safely. But even when I lived in California, we had a home in a rural area, and I was out behind. I had a field in my backyard, And as I was checking some equipment back there, I looked behind, and it was actually a brindled coyote. It was one that had bred what looked like maybe a pit bull with the brindling, and the front, it looked like one of those like two things put together. So the front was a coyote, and the back it had some mange as well, and then no hair on the tail, but it looked like it had bred with another dog. And interestingly, when they talk about the reintroduction of wolves on the former network that we were on together, I did a show with a fellow named Toby Bridges from an organization he started called Lobo Watch. And what they did was monitor the story and the lies about the reintroduction of wolves into the Yellowstone Park area. And the truth of the matter is, if someone who like this, it falls into the government would never lie category. They did not reintroduce a native indigenous species. They introduced an invasive species that was from Canada. It was a Canadian gray wolf, the Mackenzie Valley wolf. What the USDA did, or Department of Fish and Wildlife, I think it was, they recategorized entire subspecies of wolves and called them all gray wolf, and then said, we are reintroducing the gray wolf into Yellowstone. Well, what happened was the wolves never got the memo that they're supposed to stay in Yellowstone. And now they've left the park area, and yes, they are breeding with coyotes. So it's going to be interesting because they say they're supposedly federally protected, but now states are issuing permits for them. In Utah, the official story is there are no wolves here. I've seen 2 dead ones on the freeway.
Yeah, don't worry about it. We got how many hundreds of thousands of hectares, or excuse me, for the North American speaking audience, how many hundreds of thousands of acres do we have here? And you're going to guarantee me that you don't have a single wolf out there?
Yes, that is the official story. There are no wolves in Utah, which will foreclose the possibility of hunting them. So the problem is now, rather than getting a quick, clean kill, which will drop them where they stand, they get a gut shot and they run off and have a horrible death. The problem is when the federal government interferes with decisions we should be making locally, this is what happens. You have these unintended consequences. We were actually back in the Uintas hunting bull elk, and the guys that were outside said that they could hear the coyotes, how they all yap together when they are starting their little hunting journey.
Oh, yeah.
And then all of a sudden, with all the yap, 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 the guy said, you heard this one, ooh, this one little howl, that everybody shut up. You didn't hear it.
Oh, my God.
Tonight. But yes, they are crossbreeding, and it's going to be interesting. Are they going to categorize it as a wolf or a coyote? If you want to shoot it, if you need to shoot it, what's going to happen? Shoot, shovel, and shut up. Or if you want to learn how to tan, I call it the 4 S's: shoot, shovel, or shoot, skin, shovel, and shut up.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so I didn't realize how widespread this problem was. I knew that we have a problem out here in Virginia, obviously, because we read about it periodically, and there is right now there's state protection for these wolfody things, or whatever you're going to call them. I don't even know if there's a name for it yet, but we can't we have no way of, quote, legally protecting on common land. And common land is anything that is outside of a personal residential area. So if my neighbor tells me that I can shoot those dagbum things on his property, then I can completely and totally shoot any of them that I see, hear, feel, or anything in the area, which worked out really well because everybody around me owns several acres of land. And we all kind of agreed that any wolf odies that come through the area here are just going to go down. And the same thing with the deer and or anything else that might be a consumable that shows up here. Anybody has free reign. We just give each other a text on the cell phone. We have it set, usually I have it set for silent all the time, like everybody else. But if you happen to see one out the back window and you want to take a shot at it, you just text the other folks and say, hey, is it clear? And that's what we do when it's not season. When it's season, we all stay out of the extra parts of the yard there, keep the kids out of the woods and all the other stuff. But we always, you want to make sure. And, if it's, you get the all clear from all the neighbors and stuff, they know where the kids are and all that other stuff. You pull the 308 out and you go to town.
Yeah, and this is for people that think this is a cruel thing to do. It's part of management, and the thing is, this one that I got, it's in my profile picture on Facebook. It was out there by my neighbor's house one day, just hanging out and doing her thing, hunting mice, doing what they do. The problem is, we get them established here, and our neighbors have a little kid, and they raise cattle. And going back to the wolf story, the year I moved here, a month before I think we actually arrived out here in Utah, a couple miles up the road, just two wolves, one pair that would be, went through and ravaged a herd of sheep and got a bunch of calves as well, some cattle. So it was just two wolves. They were witnessed. And again, the Utah official story is that we don't have them here. I want to share with you another story about the abrogation of what we have in our federal system here. We talk about this all the time. People really might cheer on an act that the federal government might do when it is deemed to be favorable to us, for instance, where it seems to be protecting our gun rights. National reciprocity is something we've talked about all the time, where the gun enthusiasts, including the NRA, are cheering it on, and for reasons that we've gotten into many times. You can read the article Carl Jones and I wrote called National Reciprocity is a Trojan Horse, published by the 10th Amendment Center. All that glitters may not be gold, because ultimately, and this is going to tie in where we're going later on in the story in our show here, what's going to happen when we have one top-down law of the land, particularly vis-a-vis firearms, and the right to regulate them, which was reserved by the states, meaning prohibited to the general government, is finally ignored. And then the powers that be decide that we're not going to have firearms. Ultimately, they want to take them away from us. We've heard all the talks for civil war. We've heard Eric Swalwell from California say, well, that's fine. We're the ones with the nukes. So we've had representatives already threatening to annihilate millions of American citizens over firearms. Here's a case in point. It just came across my desk when we were getting set up here. Representative Chris Collins sponsors a bill that would void the New York SAFE Act. Well, everybody hates the New York SAFE Act if you live in New York. Anybody in upstate New York, that is. Just like pretty much every state we have the state capital with the state capital system of government, the state university, and all the leftists congregate there and then ruin it for everybody else. We see that in every single state. Well, here's Representative Chris Collins is sponsoring and reintroducing federal legislation that would limit a state in regulating shotguns and rifles. He's reintroducing the Second Amendment Guarantee Act. Collins is looking to limit a state's authority when it comes to regulating rifles and shotguns. Does this come across to you guys as a complete inversion of what I just described?
Not at all. I think it's completely congruent with what I'm sorry. I tried to put on my game face.
We're going to mute your mic. Collins' bill would prevent... I wouldn't do that. Plus, you'd unmute it anyway. Collins' bill would prevent states from implementing any regulations on weapons that are more restrictive than what is required by federal law. Now, let me digress a minute here, because what they're referring to here is a bastardized interpretation of the Supremacy Clause, which is in Article 6 of the Constitution, which says that the Constitution and the laws of the United States are the supreme law of the land. Now, when I gave you that description, I left out a little caveat. There's a clause there that says that the laws of the United States must be in pursuance thereof, meaning to the Constitution.
That's the sanity clause.
Right. Oh, beg your pardon. So,
and we all know that there ain't no sanity clause.
When I was in high school and I had a civics class, I loved studying the United States government. The problem being they don't teach you the correct version. So we were talking about the Supremacy Clause and federal legislation vis-a-vis, say, pollution laws. And the way it was explained was California is free to come up with their own air pollution laws, but they cannot be less stringent than federal pollution laws. So California can make them more stringent, but they cannot violate or go against the federal laws because the federal laws are supreme. But are they, though? Let's look at pollution. Where in Article 1, Section 8, does it say anything to do with air quality or pollution?
If you look closely at the Chinese Constitution, I think you're going to find that it covers pollution in there. Oh, the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, there. Okay.
So my bad. Yeah.
I tell people, look at it this way. Article 1, Section 8 expressly delegated powers. That's how the Constitution was promised to you. And Dave Benner and I are going to go through this. And just for once and for all, this will be irrefutable, and I will refer people to that episode. So what was retained by the states are the things that you don't find in Article 1, Section 8, powers delegated to the general government. The Second Amendment merely reiterates the fact that firearms, the regulation other than arming the militia, are not found in Article 1, Section 8. But here now we have something called New York's Secure. Oh, that's okay. So their Second Amendment Guarantee Act. This is a misapplication of the Second Amendment because it's only intended to restrict the general government from regulating firearms at all. So it's a misapplication of the Second Amendment. I don't think Senator Collins or Congressman Collins even understands the concept or is aware of this thing called the 10th Amendment. Like it or not, this is completely within the powers reserved to the states for New York to regulate. Collins' bill would prevent states from implementing any regulations on weapons that are more restrictive than that is what is required by federal law. Again, this is a misapplication of the Supremacy Clause. Passage of this bill would void most of the language included in New York's Secure Ammunition and Firearms Enforcement Act. That's the SAFE Act of 2003, signed into law by Governor Cuomo. Governor Cuomo unjustly took away the Second Amendment rights from law-abiding New Yorkers with so-called SAFE Act. Here's the problem. Even these politicians don't understand there's no such thing as a Second Amendment right. When you call it a right, it gives them the opportunity, opens the door, and they will kick it wide open to say rights are subject to reasonable regulation. Antonin Scalia said so as much in Heller. I wrote an article, again, published by the 10th Amendment Center, says how Heller botched the Second Amendment. And he says, and he asks this question in Heller, what kind of guns are protected by the Second Amendment? And then he says, you can't just have any gun anywhere, anytime. These rights are subject to reasonable regulation. In a sense, when he said, by the way, that it only protects it protects handguns because of their commonality and their ease of use. Again, you can read the explanation in the article or in the opinion yourself. But here's the problem. He left the door open for, by implication, saying that ARs aren't covered by the Second Amendment. Now we're seeing AR bans that federal courts are upholding from the states saying, Heller never said they were protected. So this is the problem when you get the federal judiciary and legislature interfering in state laws. So what he's saying here is
Hey, Suzanne, so this is strange. So it doesn't apply to handguns, or it only applies to handguns, right? Is that what they were saying?
That's the problem with Heller. That is the problem with Heller. He said the Second Amendment
that doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
No, none.
I mean, none. I went back. In my spare copious time, I went back and I took one for the team, and I figured it was necessary. I mean, not that the courts are going to use it, but I looked at the Second Amendment, regulated militia, being necessary for the security of a free state, capital S, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, capital A, shall not be infringed, period. Now that seemed rather, I don't see any restrictions, limitations, inclusionary language or restrictive language that says that, certain things are included and certain things are not included in this list. And then wait till I think that's when you had, that was the National Firearms Act, right? The NFA. And I remember my grandfather talking about this at one point. He
said, okay, yeah, thank you. You have to mute your mic. Thank you.
All right. So, the National Firearms Act, which I remember my grandfather told me that FDR called it the New Deal for crime. Have you ever heard that term before?
I have not heard that one, but interestingly, that came as a result of the violence that ensued from the Prohibition era.
Right. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre
Yeah.
was specifically during the time that they were debating this bill. And it does come from the misguided restriction of the Americans. Uh, I would say that their propensity to push things too far. So they came up with the whole thing about uh, prohibition, put us through prohibition, which turned us into a nation of everybody who would like to go out periodically, all of a sudden was sneaking and hiding from the law, the fact that they were consuming alcohol, and it made everyone a criminal. Think about that for a population of about 30 something million people, 40 million, something like that. And all of a sudden, almost everyone in the whole game a criminal. Now, how does that, I mean, how does that change the morality baseline of a country? Sudden, everyone should be uh, paying their dues to the federal government on a higher level because they're breaking the law. Um, on Sunday when they have dinner with the family, on Tuesday and Wednesday when they're out having a cigar and a scotch with the boys. That's just insane. But the whole concept of this brings us, and this is where we brought in Booger today, because we want to go somewhere where most people don't go. And like Suzanne said before, this is a little bit uncomfortable for many people. People sometimes necessary to think outside the box, to think differently, which is something we do here most regularly, because to think differently. You've been herded into groups of cattle. I am, bovine 007 over here, just like everybody else out there. We're all going, we're all following with the crowd. Well, now it's time to think a little bit differently. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we have our special guest with us today, Booger, as he's compassionately known. He does have a real name. His name is Sander. And he's a former U.S. advisor to many of the countries in South and Latin America. Booger, thanks for joining us today.
Obviously, I am beside a railroad track in Indiana today, as you guys found out earlier. Sorry about that. Yes, I'm not down there.
No, that's good.
Yes. There's a Toyota factory not far from here, and let me tell you what, we get trained. Getting into this, a lot of people, they want a blanket answer on Latin America, and it's almost like wanting a blanket answer on the United States. Someone can go to Detroit and have a very bad experience in the United States, depending on where you go, and try to compare that with somewhere in Iowa or Idaho. You really have to look at that person, how they behave there, to really quantify, the advice you're getting from that person. My point on this is I'm more Latin now than I am, I guess you'd say, gringo. I kind of did like the Avatar lead character, kind of did a flip-flop. Yeah. And one of the things I found.
You kind of transitioned on us, huh?
Yes, I did. And you find out you're neither any longer. I'm not one of them. Yeah.
No comprendo, gringo. Go ahead.
Yeah. What I have found on this, a lot of people worry about racism down there. You won't necessarily experience racism as much as what I would call culturalism. Remember, races mix and cultures clash. Okay. When and what, like we talked on this yesterday, we'll give advice first on how to move into a place, down there once you've selected it, and then talk about how you might want to go about selecting with your priorities. You know, because
Yeah,
it's
good point.
very difficult. Yeah, it's very difficult for me to say, oh, move to this country, not knowing what that person's priorities are, what they like to do. So what we'll basically do is I'll cover some of my favorites and why later on in the program. But everyone needs to get on and actually do their own research with what they are actually looking for.
Yeah, excellent point,
Uh,
Booger. Now, folks, if you're just joining us, you've got Waking Up with Cerberus, you've got Greg Carpenter, Suzanne Sherman, and we have the infamous Booger, retired U.S. advisor in Latin South America area, who spent what seemed to be, and I'll just throw a number out, what seems to be about 2,000 years working for the government. Doing all kinds of stuff, but we've corralled him here, and we have the honor of having him on the show. And we're talking about, well, if if you're seeing the storm come, you're seeing the problems from all of the federal government overreach, and you're saying to yourself, "My God, I don't want any part of this anymore." What do you do? Where do you go? How do you overcome that? Well, we're talking about becoming an expat, a patriot who has picked up his stuff and moved out and head overseas for a little bit, I would say, freer lifestyle opportunities. And because he's been out and about all this time for the last 200 and something years, Booger is he agreed to come on with us today and talk a little bit about some of the cultural, racial, and community type differences and things that are good and bad about some of these different places that people could move to if they were so inclined to find themselves a new home overseas somewhere. And now, Booger, I keyed in on what you said before, which is, I think, substantial. It's not that you're going to find racial strife, racial problems. It's more cultural. And I
yes,
and I think that is a very, very valid point. We experienced that in the United States more so than we acknowledge, and we just default and call it racial violence here. But that's not the case, and I think that's a very important point that people need to keep in mind. If you want to fit in with a different race, for example, my wife's from Hong Kong and I'm from New York City, right? And that's not necessarily congruent, but I can go over to her family's house and fit right in, not because they tolerate me, is because I have learned to work within the confines and constrictions or restrictions of their culture for the husband of the third oldest daughter in a Chinese family of 8 kids. I'd learned
wow,
where I should be and how I operate within the restrictions that I have as that husband. And I think that's what you're talking about here is actually fitting in and being part of the culture as opposed to sticking out like a sore thumb. Is that right?
correct. The Americans that have difficulty down there, and there's plenty of them, but there's other ones that have no problems. I really do not have a problem any more than you would dealing with certain rules and regulations in every society. But what I see down there on it is a lot of people from Canada and the US go down to Latin America and they try to force everyone to behave as if they were in United States culture. And they show that they are upset whenever the locals are not behaving that way.
Mhm.
Now, you can imagine that is going to affect how happy you are in that community.
I think
Absolutely.
it's gonna be a big impact.
Yes. And what I found down there is you want it, what a big advice I have for anyone who's moving down there is look at where you're going to move to and set yourself up to be a benefit to that community. Now, if you're going into an expat community, you might look and find out what they do not have in that expat community. For example, you want to go down there with skills. For example, shoot, for years in Panama, my family's been let off traffic tickets because I have one of the few code readers to read the trouble codes in the police cars whenever their check engine light comes on. I'm also a fairly good mechanic, things like that. So that right there is an example of being a benefit for the community. Healthcare, electrician, plumbing, all of that. When you move into a community, if you benefit that community will tend to protect you.
Well, they'll embrace you too, I think, because you have skills that make that community better. Now, as a computer hacker, do you think that they would accept me?
Yes. Yeah. If you've got, let me tell you what, there are all kinds of people down there that get screwed over by this guy, get screwed over by that guy, someone that could hack. Oh, yeah, brother. You could get in there and find out what the guy actually did with the money he stole, things like that. Or if the person is really ripping them off. You understand what I'm saying?
You raised like a good point there. Good morning, Booger. Is Suzanne.
Good morning.
About people that have done others wrong. And if you take this over to a post-collapse society, I think to myself, all of these post-APOC books you read, there's always some payback. I always think the tyrants right now, like those of us, those that are calling against that are calling for violent acts against Trump supporters, those that are trying to take our rights away, they need to think what it's going to be like if we ever go to an area without the rule of law to that time. There's going to be some payback. So I always tell people also be nice to those in your community because there might be some payback time at some point. And when you talk about having a skill set to offer, this goes for your community now and your preparedness plans. I have so many people that say, oh, I'm just going to come to your house if everything goes bad. So this is a good rule to follow, whether or not you're just moving to a new community because you're tired of what they have here, the expat movement, or if you're setting up and being prepared in your own community. I just wanted to add that in.
Yes. What I would warn people on to is a lot of the expat communities down there consist of bitter people that see the grass as being greener on the other side. And then once again, there are people looking for additional freedom. So you're going to run across all different, psychological profiles of expats in those communities. And one of the things I'll say, I would not settle in an expat community. But once again, my language, my Spanish is what I use most of the time, and my English is degraded to a working knowledge of English. As you can tell by my text I send you sometimes, Greg. Yes. But, moving into an area where you're the only American actually can be an advantage to you if you decide to behave properly. Okay. Well, back when I was in Panama, and I believe it was in 1988, I got kicked off post and declared a hazard to the Atlantic housing community. Long story, Greg. We'll get into it some other time. But I ended up moving with my pregnant wife to the town of Captiva, which was right across the street from the town of Martin Luther King. And yes, guess what? In the city of Cologne, I was the only light-skinned guy around. What did I do? Instead of hunkering behind a wall and doing the fortification thing, I went out and knocked on doors, shook hands, and told people, hey, I'm Sandra Kinsall. I'm new in this community. I know plumbing, electrician, fairly decent mechanic. You guys need any help with anything? Please come by and let me know. I'm more than willing to help. And I will say that I was more protected in that community because of that behavior than just about any other community I've been in. So that, that's a point to get across to people. You go into an area like that. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, that's a good point, Booger. So this is something I'm sorry, I tried to talk before, and I was on mute like the big dummy. Um, this is a point that people should really reflect on for a minute. Booger went house to house, said, "Hi, I'm here. I have these skills that I am good at. I want to offer you my assistance." And you were welcomed into the community. This is something that used to happen. I remember moving to a couple places when I was a kid, and it did not include juvie hall. So all you people out there that are thinking, no, I was not hacking computers before computers existed. People would go into a community and they would integrate into that community. We don't have that much anymore. And believe me, it wasn't the blanket method of how things happened in the states. There were certain communities that always were rebellious against each other and did not fit like hand in glove, kind of like Michael Jackson and a glove. It, you know, not Michael Jackson. What's his name? O.J. Simpson. That's it. O.J. Simpson and his glove. It just didn't fit. It didn't. It doesn't work. And we have to be adult enough to accept when things like that don't work and understand the differences and be an adult to say, okay, that this doesn't work, that doesn't work. Most of the time, it's going to work if you come in with the right frame of mind. And that's what you're sharing here, Booger, is that you came in with the right frame of mind. You came in, you're going to help. You're not going to be a hindrance. You're not going to suck up unemployment. You're not going to be a problem for everybody. And you kind of want to be a helper as you would, as anybody else in the community would.
Correct.
Good morning.
That,
This is Jeff Johnson. How are you doing today? I have a question because I kind of asked this question yesterday, and that's how this all kind of got set up. If you were to pick the top, let's just do a top 5. Because if you got me, I have no idea about becoming an expat, and I'm sure we have listeners out there have no idea. If you were to pick a top 5 for us to start our research with, what would be your top 5 Latin American countries that you would suggest for us beginners to start looking at?
Well, hold on. Let me clarify a little bit more. Booger, can you just take it from country? Because some of these countries are huge. And some of them, as we know, like Mexico and Brazil and Paraguay, are unions. They're unions of free states. Where did I hear that before? Holy cow. So are you able to like go down to maybe a little bit smaller than country? Because if I look at, if we're going to talk about Mexico, there's bad places in Mexico to go and there's good places in Mexico. If you could give us like a region, but for the smaller countries, if you say like Nicaragua or, hold on, let me just say a quick prayer, El Salvador, right? You you could just include the whole country like that. How's that?
Yes. Okay. Here's what I would say. With these priorities, right? Private property rights it's one of my biggies. Okay, that you have rights to private property, and if you're wanting to go with rights to private property being, one of the top ones, say what you would want to do is look at, say, Uruguay. Okay, Uruguay, believe it or not, is actually rated top in Latin America for private property. You there?
Yes, we're all here.
Okay, you there? Yeah, Uruguay is actually rated top. Firearms ownership is another thing. Firearms ownership is allowed in Uruguay. And it's really, it's a very pleasant country. I've been all over Uruguay, spent probably about 12 months total time in Uruguay. Unfortunately, every single time I was in Uruguay, it was during their winter time, which is I never want to be cold. Be ready for wintertime climate that's about like South Carolina or northern Florida. Okay. Um, but one of the things Uruguay is top. Going from there on it, Chile is very good. Look at Chile. Now, this is once again what you're looking for. If you're looking for something very cheap, there would be a different, you might start looking at places like Honduras, things like that. If you're looking for a place that, if that's your priority, is being cheap. Am I pretty well giving you the type of info you're looking for now? Hello?
Well, I said when I queried this with Greg the other day, my first statement to him was that it has to be a country that will allow me to keep my firearms because I love shooting and I love my firearms. So that was like my number one priority. And I would say second is the value for the money, as far as making my limited funds go the furthest. And so Honduras you just hit on that one.
Yes, Honduras too. The firearms ownership, if you get in there and look in Honduras, it's rated very high in your ability to own weapons and also carry them for personal defense. That's another thing a lot of people have to understand. Most of the countries in Latin America require you register all firearms, and depending on the type of firearm, you will be given what's called a right of ownership or a carry permit, a permit of ownership or a carry permit. Some countries, by constitutional right, you are authorized to have firearms. Other countries, for example, Costa Rica, you are not constitutionally guaranteed to be able to own a firearm. It's considered a privilege in Costa Rica. Me personally, I would not go to Costa Rica. Like you say, economics, firearms, freedom. In Costa Rica, the Americans have raised the price of everything. And there is actually an anti-American sentiment kind of starting up in Costa Rica because they're resenting in their opinion, is the Americans raising the price. Well, let me rephrase something. The North Americans raise, because they'll quickly tell you they're American too. They're just Central American or South American. The people from the States raising the price on property and raising the price of food and all kinds of other items. When you explain to the local people, I did not set that price on the land and I did not set the price on the food. You guys wanting to get more money are the ones that actually raise the prices, not me. So sometimes being very nice but explaining situations to people can be a benefit. But Honduras would be really up top. One of the lower ones for firearms would be Panama. You cannot get a gun into Panama now. I don't care if it's 400 years old legally, unless you're aware of some loopholes. And every loophole that you take, you assume some risk trying to take that loophole. There are loopholes in Panama, but at the moment they have a ban for further importation of firearms. It's getting more and more expensive in Panama. It is a shell issue country on carry permits, but considering you're going to pay about $1,500 for a Taurus 38 Special, they're not very high on that list.
So, Booger, let me see if I got this right. You can purchase a firearm there, but you cannot bring any in?
Yes, that is correct. They're trying to overturn that law down there right now. But you're not going to, at the moment, you're not going to get one in at all. To let you know the loophole on it, and it's generally the wealthy elite. This is one of the loopholes. Occasionally they'll have what they call an amnesty program pop up, but they never let anybody except their buddies in the clique know about it. And they have the guns that they want to get legal sitting in their yachts, and they go get them legal whenever that's happening. Now, if someone was in and connected and showed up when that program was being run and knew which door to walk through, you would not be turned down either. But it's, you kind of see what I'm getting at on it.
When you mentioned the elites, I'll share a quick story. My parents live in California, and obviously they will have some very liberal friends there. And one of their friends is a couple that has one of the largest residential land development companies in these United States. And this guy they're both hardcore leftists. There are pictures of their kids with Obama, and they're friends with the Clintons and all these other cast of clowns. And my mom one day was telling me, oh, so-and-so was in Mexico and he was shooting big guns. I said, isn't that interesting? How convenient, because the rank and file don't have the same rights that the elitists do. And he works very hard to make sure people like me cannot shoot those same guns over here in this country. But all of a sudden it's cute and amusing when they get to do it. Like, this guy's more of a man because he uses the might and force of this government to keep me from exercising those same privileges that he has. I was very annoyed to hear that. And that's one of the reasons, again, I personally would not consider moving to any of these other countries. For now, we've got certain guarantees here, even though they're being whittled away. And that's why I moved to the mountains, quite honestly.
Yeah, and it's one of those things on it. I've heard the take of a lot of people down in Latin America of, we may not be constitutionally insured to have the right here, but no one really cares if we do what the right is saying. What you're guaranteed the right to do here, we do it without a right, and we have less trouble than you do because we have less restrictions around the right. But what I try to explain, once again, since you do not have that established as a right, it can be taken away with the swipe of a pen.
And honestly, that can happen too. Yeah.
Well, it's just how you have confusion by the government. I mean, they have less to say on your everyday life. Would that be a fair assessment?
And yes. They do have less to say in your everyday life. Things are not as developed. But, to cover real quick the 5 countries, you asked for 5. I'd say Uruguay, Chile, Ecuador, Honduras, and it would be a toss-up on number 5 between Colombia and Panama. But Panama right now, because of the gun laws, would not be one of my prefer. Okay? And you're correct on that. You get out in the hinterlands, and life is pretty well the way it was, and you're free as can be out there. But be aware that's changing quickly in Latin America. For example, there's little communities out in the jungle in Panama that I've been going to for years. What is starting to pop up all over the place out there is satellite Wi-Fi. Imagine that. They actually will put in a satellite downlink out there that recharges off solar cell batteries. And everyone out there has free Wi-Fi. Well, they're gleaning information. They're figuring out how can we control these people out there. In my opinion, that's one of the benefits of it. Is all of these people are providing them with so much information when they recklessly get on social media and start talking about everything going on in their little town. So it may be remote now, wherever you look at, but remember, a satellite Wi-Fi downlink can be stuck in there at any time.
Absent a complete collapse of all technology and society as we know it, there really is no safe corner to where we can retreat. Even as remote as I am, we know that they know our every move out here. So with all this advanced technology comes these detractors, I suppose. I just don't have an answer as to how to get away from it, unless, again, you're banking on, if there's a complete collapse, and I kind of going into my prepper APOC mode, is do you have a place ultimately where you can survive without any form of help? And then that goes into the community and where you discuss Booger having skills and a means to contribute. So again, that works in modern society and post APOC if we ever get into that route.
I had a very interesting discussion with one of the very senior people up at the National Security Agency while I still worked there. And they said that we collect so much data here much like other intelligence agencies around the world. And I snickered to myself, yes. And he said that it's really a condemning statement that people think that they're so important that we would look at what they're doing in their own little life. Now, I was quiet for a minute.
I wish that were true.
And I said, now come on. And we had a further discussion about what information, what data are really looked at and what's happening. And I'd have to say that even though because of the pay grade, the pay level of this person, he was administratively correct because he had a higher rank than me. By every abject meaning of the discussion, he was absolutely wrong.
Yeah, I'd say when you look at something like that, somebody says you're not important. The bottom line to them, none of us are important as individuals, but how to control the individuals is very important to them. See how I would argue that point with him?
Oh, completely. And actually, that's the part that I had discussed. We've had world population control conferences, and recently released from the National Security Archive was the U.S. plan. It's a letter from Henry Kissinger on how to control the U.S. population and what did we need to do to participate in world population control. And you can now have a better understanding. We're talking about population control. All right, what does that really mean? Well, that really means, guess what? We're going to make sure that a certain number of people they're going to have to die in order for us to make sure that we don't have too many people on the planet. And you know where they're going to start.
Yeah.
We're going to start with the ones that can't defend themselves. And then they're going to go and move from there. And that's what they've been doing all these years, folks. If you really want to understand about what's happening, for example, with the abortion movement,
I was just going to say, who's the most defenseless out there?
Yeah, I would definitely tell you, go back and read the Kissinger memo. I'll pull out a copy. I happen to have a copy. I'll pull it out and we can post it up there. People can read it because I think it is very condemning and it tells you exactly what we've been doing ever since the first World Population Control Conference back in the 1920s, where we had some of our most elite from this country. Might I throw in a name, Prescott Bush? Anybody familiar with that guy? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Ancestor of two presidents. Yeah. Yeah. He went to the Nazi World Population Control Conference in 1935. And he was there. So and there's I mean, once you start to see all of these quote coincidences, they're not coincidences. There is a plan for you, and you're not part of the plan.
Are you familiar with, I believe it was Cass Sunstein's brother, or no, it was Rahm Emanuel's brother, who is a physician, who wrote this paper, and this was during the debates of the Affordable Care Act, and everybody mocked Sarah Palin for talking about death panels. But this report actually, first of all, it described human beings as units, and which units in this hypothetical society would be most worthy of the resources of the collective. So the babies would be not meritorious of much effort, heroic efforts, and contributions medically wise, because the parents and the society had not invested much in their development at this point. So then you had the elderly whose use had effectively run out. So we really don't want to worry about investing too much of our resources into these people. So it was deemed worthy of putting the most investment into the producers, or what we can refer to as the worker drones, that will be contributing what? More tax dollars, more revenue, more effort into the government, which, by the way, produces itself nothing.
Right. I remember listening to a speech from Robert Reich, former Secretariat of Labor. And he was in, I think he was in University of California, Santa Barbara. And he was explaining how single payer system would work and why it's important and how you would fund it. And the first thing that he said was, you've got to get all of the people that aren't sick and have a low probability of being sick. You have to trick them into paying money and joining this system. Otherwise, the whole thing collapses. It can't be funded. Wow. What a great idea. Let's see if we could trick everybody into participating.
In Canada, there was a professor who wanted to bring his 13-year-old son to move in and live with him and his wife. And the 13-year-old son, I believe, had Down syndrome. And the Canadian government turned this child down to live there because he would be a drain on society. I think is it Greenland that brags that they have no Down syndrome people? Iceland that brags about it. Why? Because they've murdered them all. Guys, I got to break away. I'm going to go over to K-Talk, and I will. Are you doing another hour?
Not today. Not today.
Okay. Well, that was fun. Thanks for letting me join you. I will catch up with you later.
Yes, ma'am. You bet. Have a good one.
Thanks, Booger. Bye, Jeff.
Hey, thank you.
So
yeah, hey, I've got 2 points I'd like to throw out real quick if anybody's doing the search to assist them in moving in down there if they decide to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, one thing to remember, you're speculating, okay? Because there is no country down there that is the same now as it was 10 years ago. And it will be different 10 years from now. Now, there are areas that are remote that life has not changed. Okay, so you are speculating to a certain extent. And whenever you're doing your research on these things for, your Freedom Index, Private Property Index, ensure that you differentiate between a citizen and a resident. Okay, that's very important in a lot of these countries. For example, in Mexico, you can never become a citizen. You can never own land in Mexico unless you become a citizen. The only way to become a citizen is marrying another Mexican citizen. Okay, you'll want to make sure you actually think about the questions you're asking and ask them properly.
So it's pretty restrictive in some places.
Yes.
How interesting. Okay, well, there you go, folks. That's something interesting. I didn't realize that. I know in Japan that you can't become a citizen if you are not a specific race or you don't fall into the restrictive immigration category that they have there, where they allow like less than 0.1% of people of non-Japanese descent to become citizens in that year. So I know that other countries have restrictive laws like that, but I never really thought about it. Now, I had my top places to go to on, the quote worst day in America scenario, I would call it, I guess. And interestingly enough, it did not include places, some of the places that Booger has just mentioned to you. So I would say that what you might want to consider doing, do a little research, find out a little bit more about what's going on, what's out there, and what's actually going to meet your needs if you so become inclined to move somewhere else. Don't just take it at face value. Don't blanket it and say, okay, you know what? I'm just going to pick X country because they have good food. Something like that. Really put a lot of thought into it. Don't rush. Don't rush. Don't rush. Make sure that you can transition if you have wealth that you're bringing with you, if you have silver, you have money, your bank accounts, things like that. That all comes in handy, folks, like you would if you're going to move from New York City to Mabel, Minnesota. Population, I think 650, 670. All right. So, on behalf of Suzanne Sherman and Mr. Jeff Johnson, Mr. Jumpin' Jeff Johnson, our producer, we'd like to thank you all for stopping in here, for waking up Cerberus today. I know that Suzanne would say yeehaw. She's off to dig more snow after she gets off K-Talk because she's had about 6 to 10 feet out there so far. I don't know how much. Booger, our special guest, and everyone out there, God bless you all and have a gloriously wonderful day.